founder and CEO Avi Hoffman, and I'm so happy you joined us as we continue our mission of celebrating and promoting Jewish history, life, and culture, and their positive and far-reaching impact on the world. Enjoy the following presentation, and if you start to kvel, visit whyilovejewish.org to support our cause. Thank you.
I was the chief prosecutor of the biggest murder trial in human history. It was the Nuremberg proceedings against the Nazi extermination squads that had murdered over 1 million people who were totally innocent of any crimes. I was then 27 years old. It was my first case, and I was trying to create a rule of law which would be a protection for all of humanity.
We are now ready to hear the presentation by the prosecution.
This was the tragic fulfillment of a program of intolerance and arrogance. Vengeance is not our goal, nor do we seek merely a just retribution. We ask this court to affirm by international penal action man's right to live in peace and dignity, regardless of his race or creed. The case we present is a plea of humanity to law.
Once in a while, something positive comes out of suffering. This has certainly been the case in the amazing life of Benjamin Ferencz. At 27, Ferencz became an investigator of Nazi war crimes after World War II and chief prosecutor for the United States Army at the Einsatzgruppen trial. the largest of the 12 military trials held by the U.S. authorities at Nuremberg, Germany.
Genocide, the extermination of whole categories of human beings, was a foremost instrument of the Nazi doctrine.
Ferencz, who recently celebrated his 100th birthday, is revered around the world, having presided over this trial, the largest murder trial in history. 22 Nazi high-ranking officers responsible for the deaths of more than 1 million people were brought to justice. Following the trial, Ferencz devoted himself to setting up reparations programs and threw himself into a proactive crusade to replace war with law. He also played a leading role in the establishment of the International Criminal Court, which finally became a reality when it opened in 2002 in The Hague. In 2018, Ferencz met another humanitarian with a similar vision, Yaacov Heller, a globally recognized sculptor and artist, well known for his large outdoor sculptures, Holocaust memorials, biblical representations, and silver electroformed jewelry creations. Several years prior, Heller was commissioned to create the Garden of Humanity, an educational memorial to the 6 genocides of the 20th century. Located in Boca Raton, Florida, the garden is comprised of 14 handcrafted stone benches, each engraved with a meaningful quote that inspired Heller. With themes echoing the sentiments of tolerance, compassion, respect, and love, Heller selected words from presidents of the United States to pop culture figures, from those who fought for what's right to those who make us think. Important figures in world history that inspired him, including one from Benjamin Ferencz. Then, in a twist of fate, the two men met. Ferencz traveled to Florida for the screening of a film about his life, Prosecuting Evil. While there, he decided to visit the garden to meet Heller and see his bench. And that is how a dialogue between these two brilliant men began. A year later, the two had a second meeting, again in the Garden of Humanity and at Heller's Gallery 22. This meeting was marked by an extensive conversation about peace, war, and tolerance. As the meeting drew to a close, Heller asked Ferencz permission to create a bust of him. This modest but strong-minded man agreed immediately. He was delighted that the bust would become a permanent memorial to his lifelong fight to create a world-based rule of law, and perhaps even be placed in the halls of the International Criminal Court in The Hague. This documentary chronicles the meetings and conversations leading Heller to make the bust of Benjamin Ferencz. As Ferencz likes to say, 2 heads are better than 1.
Well, I have 3 children that are third-generation Holocaust survivors. So their grandparents, who both passed away, were survivors of Auschwitz. So I was very familiar with the Holocaust, even though they didn't want to talk about it, as most Holocaust survivors don't. They like to kind of put that in the back of their mind and lock it up, because what they went through is just so inhumane. I talked to Jim Badmasian, who is Armenian, but went through, he himself didn't, but grandparents went through the Armenian genocide in the First World War, 1915 to 1922. 2/3 of the Armenian population were annihilated by the Ottoman Turks. But I was talking with Jim and Martin, and Jim called me up one day and said, would you like to do a memorial, a Holocaust memorial in Royal Palm Place? And I said, you know I would. And he says, well, pick out a place and drop a plan, He says, just one thing. He says, you got to cover the Armenian genocide also. So I couldn't just do the Armenian genocide and the Holocaust, the First and Second World War. I covered all the genocides of the 20th century, and there were 6 major genocides between Bosnia and Uganda, and Armenians and Rwanda. So I covered all the genocides of the 20th century in this memorial. It's right behind my gallery. 14 benches with inscriptions from presidents of the United States and Benjamin Ferencz, who was the Nuremberg prosecutor. Here we are at the first bench in my Garden of Humanity, which is a well-known quote from Ben Ferencz, a warning to the world that if we don't teach tolerance, that the tragedy of the Holocaust could happen again and it could be the end of the world.
Nuremberg taught me that creating a world of tolerance and compassion would be a long and arduous task. And I also learned that if we did not devote ourselves to developing effective world law, the same cruel mentality that made the Holocaust possible might one day destroy the entire human race.
I got a call from Don Ferencz, who told me about a film that they had made about his father. Barry Average had produced a film called Prosecuting Evil, and they're going to have a screening at FAU at the Living Room Theater. I invited my friend Arlene Herson, who sat on the board of the U.S. Holocaust Museum in Washington. She was appointed by George Bush. I figured that she would love to see this film. And we came here after the film, and it was the first time that Ben saw his bench. Well, it was meant to be that we were to get together like this and discuss ways of teaching the world and helping the world and using our talents, my talents. The way he uses his talents, I'll use my talents. He liked the idea, and I was thrilled that he confirmed that I'm on the right track with what I'm doing.
And I think we should all be grateful to Yaacov for coming with this type of permanent inscription as a reminder to people that war and law don't go together. War could be eliminated by the rule of law, and that's what I've been trying to do for most of my life. We still have a long way to go, but we have made remarkable progress. In fact, when I went to school, there was no such thing as international criminal law. There was no such thing as Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Today, that exists all around the world. Of course, we still have wars going on, and it's a shame that we haven't yet recognized that war making should be abolished and be treated as a horrible crime. We have so many other ways of settling our disputes. And until we recognize that, there's danger for the next population, if there is one. We've got to teach people that war making is a crime against humanity, and it should be condemned as such. It's nothing heroic about that. War makes mass murderers out of otherwise decent people of all nationalities, and I have seen it as a combat soldier and as a liberator of many concentration camps. When we had the International Criminal Court, the permanent court created, I worked on it for 50 years at least. The chief prosecutor, Reno Campo of Argentina, called me up and he said, "Ben, we'd like you to do the closing statement for the prosecution." I said, "I will." The first trial, my first experience as a lawyer, was the biggest murder trial. They murdered over 1 million Jews. The second trial was the first trial of the International Criminal Court. I was then 92 years old. It take that much time, but it takes that much time
kept at it.
And persistence. Never give up. That's my slogan. 3 times: never give up, never give up, never give up. And that is the answer. And it's hard to do. Everyone has a miracle story to tell. You'll be surprised to learn that I was born in Transylvania. My wife was born in Transylvania, a country which doesn't exist anymore. And I learned that my sister was born in the same bed I was born in. She was born in Hungary. I was born in the same bed, they called it Romania. And it didn't matter what they called the country, it's how they treat the people that counts. And both of them were equally persecuting the Jews. And because of the persecution and poverty, I was 9 months old. I told my parents, let's get out of here. We went through the Statue of Liberty and came into the United States. So I've been a liberator in many camps in the American zone of Germany. I have seen the crematoria when they were going. I have seen the victims as they were liberated. And of course, it's an indelible impression. And to see that the slogan, never again, has become ever again, that we are still doing the same thing in all parts of the world, pains me enormously. And I suffer for every soldier who is killed trying to prevent this, and for all the victims of all nationalities which are today affected by that. And we have got to begin to think universally in planetary terms. We are all inhabitants of one small planet, and we must deal with the people and the planet in such a way that everyone can live in peace and dignity. And it can be done if we have the resources to do it. We don't have the intelligence to do it. How many more millions of people we have to kill before you wake up and see that's not the way to be?
That's why I have Einstein's quote over here about what I just mentioned to you earlier, which I think is very important. I know not with what weapons World War III will be fought, but I do know that World War IV will be fought with sticks and stones.
I have a picture of Einstein on my desk in New Rochelle, New York.
Very important.
Yeah.
Very forward thinker.
So we've got to change our way of thinking about war and peace. And sculpture, paintings are a very effective way of reaching the heart and soul of people who will be moved, as I have been, by the work that you've been doing here.
I really appreciated the opportunity just to be with my mentor and my hero. And I told him that you're my hero. I told him to his face, I said, you know, you're my hero. He says, I'm my own hero. He's got a wit and a sense of humor about him that I just love the man. And you just want to hug him. The last time that he came to my gallery and to the Garden of Humanity, I told him that I would like to do a bust of him. And he said, go for it. He says, nobody's done a bust of me before. And that's all I needed. It's his personal okay to go ahead and do it. This is day 7 that I'm working on it. But even I'm getting details, as you see, in his hat. Once I get to a point where it's perfectly smooth and the shape is exactly the way I want it, then I can do the details on the skin like I'm doing to make it look like 99-year-old skin. I mean, it would be easy with one swipe of the finger to erase all that. We're on the way to Ben Ferencz's home, going to sit for me for the final details of the bust that I've been working on in clay for the last 2 weeks. The man is 99 years old, but he's got a wit about him, and I'm really looking forward to this sit down with Ben. He's going to give me a final approval to go ahead and cast it in bronze. I'm looking forward to see the look on his face when he sees it. I put my whole heart into making this bust, and everybody sees it. I mean, I've got every line in his face, and the details, he sat for me on his porch.
What are you going to do with all these busts?
Well, this one, I'm going to bake it in an oven and make it hard, first of all. And that's firing the clay. And then I'm going to make a silicone rubber mold over the clay.
Yeah.
Then I'm going to put a fiberglass mother mold over that to hold the rubber in shape when I remove the clay.
Yeah.
Then I'm going to pour melted wax into the mold. I'm going to pour it in, and I'm going to pour it out, and pour it in, and pour it out. Build up a thickness of about a half an inch of wax. The wax I'm going to remove from the mold. I'm going to dip it in a ceramic shell material, a slurry of ceramic shell, over and over again for a few days. Let it dry. Dip it again until I build up a thickness of about an inch.
That's worth the bother. Okay.
So it's a big job, but it's going to last for at least 5,000 years.
5,000 years.
This bronze. Once I finish
check
it.
that out. I'm going to get permission from the devil to go and take a check it out.
Right. You're going to see it.
I'm going to see it.
You're going to see
I
it.
get one too?
Absolutely. Yep.
I look like I'm smiling. You gave me a smile since you sat down.
My next step is to heat the earlobes with the hot air gun to make them hard enough. The rest of the piece is solid. There's a strong armature. It's not going anywhere. There's a lot of metal inside there, metal tube wire wrapped around an armature, a metal pole coming out from. So it's in very good shape for me to be able to make a master mold out of this entire clay. And from that point, the foundry is going to do most of the work. When I say the foundry, the fellow who pours the bronze and melts the bronze, I'm going to be supervising the entire thing. But it'll be done by qualified people who know what they're doing. They know how to protect themselves with asbestos suits. When they heat the bronze, it's 2,000 degrees. And I tried to film it with my camera, and it actually burnt the lens off my camera.
Yaacov. Oi, I got to reach up, stand on my toes.
I put Moses receives the law, and that's the only thing I could put with your piece. You know, the law. Moses receives the law.
Well,
The Ten Commandments.
I'm in
Thou
good.
shalt not
I'm in
kill.
good company.
We all got together when I made the presentation. What Ben said when he accepted the bust, he said, "I'm sure it will go into the International Criminal Court. That's the right place for it." And when he said that, I was thrilled. There's no other word for it. Ben, it's with my deepest feeling that I want to express my gratitude for all that you have done and all that you continue to do to make this a better world for our children, for the future. And like I said, you're a great speaker, and I speak with my hands, and this is the best way that I can thank you for everything that you've done, is by creating this bust of you.
I'm grateful that you have taken the time to make it accessible. I think where this belongs is somewhere in the new International Criminal Court in The Hague.
My feeling was that it was just an act of divine guidance that had me do this bust. It was something beyond what I can put into words. It was meant to be. Ferencz.
This It means a lot to me to know that there's a permanent record of the guy who tried to change the world. And if that can inspire young people to try to do the same, which I hope they will do, it will certainly be a contribution to humanity. I appreciate Yaakov's interest in disseminating the ideas which I've spent my life trying to put forth in an effort to end war making and to have a peaceful society for everybody on this planet. And so I'm grateful to Yaacov for his initiative in deciding that he wanted to make a bust of my head. My reasoning was 2 heads are better than 1. But in fact, I know this will be on display as a record of how I spent my whole life, and it will also demonstrate the artistry of the sculptor. I set up all the restitution programs for Wiedergutmachung and so on for the Nazi victims, Jews and non-Jews alike. It was always an important point with me. I had offices in Tel Aviv, Haifa, and Jerusalem to help the Nazi victims with their claims. It was a complicated business. And so I was very familiar with my first trip to Israel, which was on the 3rd anniversary of the state. I was greeted by the finance minister. He came down to the boat. We came by boat from Italy. And so we had, very close connections. And in Yad Vashem, they got the files. These organizations that I set up, they were to help. They were legal aid offices, and because things were complicated, and most of the claimants came from Israel because most of them fled there. I was a source of great income for Israel, not only in the bulk settlement agreement between the German government, the Israeli government, and the claims conference that I represented, but also the number of
helped my father-in-law, my kids. It helped them, and you helped arrange that. Those reparations from the German government to Israel.
That's right, I have a picture of that. We're signing the agreement. There's Adenauer on one side, and Moshe Sharet was there signing for Israel. We had Nahum Goldman signing for the Claims Conference, the World Jewish Congress, and I'm sitting next to Goldman because when he took, Adenauer handed him Adenauer was supposed to sign first, and his ink didn't have any ink in it. The pen wouldn't write. So I handed Goldman my pen that my wife had given me when I got out of Harvard as a memento, and I carried with me throughout the war. So it was a good luck charm. I give it to Goldman. Goldman hands it to Adenauer. Adenauer signs with my check. He gives it back to Goldman. Goldman signs for the Claims Conference, which was the consolidation. And that was the first time in human history that a defeated nation was paying compensation to the individuals. First payment was for the individuals, and then for the state of Israel, I think we gave them, $1.5 billion or $15 billion, something like that. And on a cockamamie theory that since they were good Samaritans and they provided the help to the victims, which Germany should have been taking care of, but they couldn't because of their condition. So Israel advanced the money, you have to pay it back. And they bought that theory because it was a political decision. But
it's amazing
what
you have done, what you are. That's why I'm inspired to do this work, because I want the world to know.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you. You're my hero, I told you. Like I said before, Ben, until 120, and if anybody can do it, you can do it.
Why do you limit me so much? When people say have a good day, I say no. So what do you mean no? Why should you say have a good day? Say have a good life. You don't have to repeat it every day. So that's it. Don't take yourself too seriously. I love it. Good boy. I thank you for your help. Bye.
This is a very important film for several different reasons. Of course, we know who Benjamin Ferencz is, we know who Yaacov Heller is, but the idea that both of these forces have now come together to create this piece of art is extraordinary. So, if you could tell us, when did the concept to turn the making of the bust into a film happen?
Well, it's really interesting. Yaacov and I have been working together for almost 2 years, and one day he says to me, "Do you know who Benjamin Ferencz is?" And I said, "No." He sends me a link, and I watched his TED Talk from many years ago, and I was just blown away by this man, knowing he was 97 or 96 at the time. So I said, why don't we have him come to the Garden of Humanity again? You know, we started to do some documentary work on Yaacov and the whole aggregate of the scope of his work. And the first time I started working with him, day one, he was drawn to the bench. It was just one of those things, the magnetism, he was drawn to it. So after I watched this piece on Ben, I said, you know, why don't we have him come back and maybe we'll feature him in the documentary. So Yaacov put me in touch with Don Ferencz, Ben's son, and we coordinated it. And they came here one afternoon, and I had a camera crew here, and I did the interview, much like you're doing now, and it was amazing. And then we didn't know what we were going to have out of it, quite frankly. It was just one of those things. But the two of them had such a kindred spirit about tolerance and peace and the concern about the next generation in the film, as Ben says, if there is one. So at the end of the day, and I didn't know this until after he left, Yaacov says to me, you know, I asked Ben if I could do a bust of him, and he said yes. I said, wow. So that was a Saturday. Monday, I wake up, I get an email from Yaacov, and there's a picture of a piece of clay, which you'll see in the documentary. And literally, like he said, for 2 weeks, 2.5 weeks, he went at it, and I kept coming in here. And you know, in the interim, the gallery was in the process of being transformed. But you know, it doesn't matter to him. He'll work if there's no lights on. I mean, you know, he'll just keep going and going and going. So 3 weeks, you know, come and go, and I shoot the clay, and then there's a picture of Ben. I think he got it from the New York Times. He'd just been featured with the documentary that he referenced, Prosecuting Evil. So I said, you know, what do you think? He goes, I'd love to just, you know, sit with him for a little while just to get the final touches of it. So I coordinated that again with Ben and his son Don. So we went to Ben's home, and this little porch, he's got so much legal material there, I barely could fit a crew in. So I just came in with one camera, and I grabbed about an hour between the two of them. It was just very poignant conversation about life and humanity and Ben's experiences and Yaakov's experience. And Yaacov is getting what he feels are the final touches of the bust. And from there, you know, we went to the foundry early in the morning one day where I think he had gone before me and his camera had exploded. You know, 2,000 degrees foundry. So I stood far enough back, and I got some really nice B-roll of that. And, you know, I started to say, you know, we've got a tremendous story here, not just about the making of the bust, but the kindred spirit of the humanity and the things that they hold sacred in the world. Mind you, you know, Ben is about to turn 100. Yaakov's young enough to be his son, you know, so there's a nice relationship that's developed there. So over the course of, you know, the next few months, you know, we did a presentation. Yaacov did one here in the gallery for a select group of people, and we document that. I picked Ben up, and we had a nice, you know, afternoon together, brought him here, and Yaacov and him, you know, gave him the bust. And it just blossomed into a lot more. And then COVID-19 happened, and quite frankly, we got derailed like a lot of people, but I said to Yaacov, we're gonna get this done. And I think sort of, you being involved with this was the impetus of, we're gonna get this done. We want Avi to world premiere it. So, gone back and forth virtually to get this film. And I think what people will get out of this film, I hope they'll see how important tolerance is, this moment in time of what's happening in the last 6, 7, 8 months, which, between, we know Black Lives Matter and everything else, but the tolerance, the peace that this piece of art that Yaacov has created represents, that what Ben Ferencz, I believe, represents, is very poignant in 2020.
You know how active I am in Holocaust education and awareness. And so for us, when we think about programs, we're constantly trying to figure out how we can get to younger audiences. So tell me about your conversations with Ben Ferencz while you were making the bust, and how those conversations transcended from the Jewish Holocaust experience to the larger concept of the Garden of Humanity, tolerance, acceptance of all, learning about all genocide, learning about all refugees and all the genocides of the 20th century.
Yeah, I was originally commissioned by an Armenian gentleman by the name of James Batmasian to do this. He asked me if I wanted to do a Holocaust memorial, knowing my background, and I told him, I said, I would love to do it. He says, well, pick out a place in Royal Palm Place and draw up a plan and let's do it, but on one condition. You have to recognize the Armenian genocide. And I couldn't just do the Armenian genocide and the Holocaust, even though the Holocaust was very symbolic, because the Armenian genocide, 2/3 of the Armenian race annihilated, led into Hitler telling his armies, who's talking about the Armenian genocide? Let's go in. 2 weeks before he went into Poland, he told his armies, nobody's talking about the Armenian genocide, let's just do it. And the ethnic cleansing of the Second World War began. But the idea was not to do just that, so I did research on the other genocides of the 20th century, and I came up with a plan. I said, let's commemorate all the genocides with a memorial. And that's when it started. He agreed. He thought it was a good idea. And that's what we did. I want to repeat your other part of the question about education and my conversations with Ben about what are we going to do using this memorial. And I said, I've already given lectures at Palm Beach State College with Marta Batmasian, who's a professor, a doctorate, and gives talks regularly at FAU and at other universities. She was a Brandeis professor, and she gave lectures about the Armenian genocide. So she and I together would go give lectures to the university, not just the students, but to the history teachers. And the history teachers, in return, would send their students over to the Garden of Humanity, and the 14 benches have quotes with names that they can easily Google and find out and learn about the Holocaust, not only the Holocaust, but all the genocides of the 20th century. And that was the main idea of conversation between Ben and I, was teaching how do we spread the word to the young about genocides, about the evil in the world, and about why we need tolerance more today. And that was probably the key point of the film, was talking with Ben mutually about how we can teach the young, how we can educate the young about what's going on now. It's so timely because this is what's happening. We're going in that direction again.
So, building on that question, how do you think you can use this important film to reach audiences that might not normally see this kind of material?
We're going to obviously try to get it wide release as possible. It's not a Jewish film per se. Obviously, two Jewish legends in the pantheon of the Jewish world are the focal point, but the messages behind the men are really the most important piece of it. You know, in the film, I've got footage of Ben speaking, you know, the opening statement, you know, when he's trying these 22 Nazi generals. And it's, you know, and you listen to what he says, and he said, our goal is not revenge, it's you know, justice. And, you know, he and I have talked about with Ben as well. I mean, it's an amazing point of view that the man has had. You know, at 27 years old, the youngest ever to prosecute a case, mind you, you know, 22 Nazi generals who committed 1 million murders. So I think it's a short film, but it's short enough to where anybody can watch it and understand, because, and Yaacov and I talk about this all the time, the Holocaust in many regards has been extracted out of history on a conventional sense in terms of schools. And while you can Google it and do all these other things, and I think Ben's, you know, profile has been raised because he turned 100 and all these things that have come about, and I think it's important. And Yaakov's point of view, being a Jewish artist and having that history and the relatives and all that, you know, there's a symbiosis here that I think comes through, not only the art, but in the film. I think they should also certainly watch Ben's movie to get a sense of the history. I mean, some people can't tolerate it, but that's the irony of it, is that, you know, people like Ben had to go into the camps at 27 years old and witness the aftermath of what happened there. And one of the things, the profound thing he said to me and Yaacov was the way that the Nazis kept records. And it was just, you know, he gets very emotional about it, but he knows what he's done in a positive sense of impacting the world, and being 100 and being able to articulate the way he still does. You know, I think it's a very important piece. So we want to get it out to everybody, you know, and in many ways as we can, to not only get the message, but to show Yaakov's art. I mean, this is one of you know, one of the million artists, one of a million man, you know, being in Ben Ferencz. So there's, again, I could talk about it for days, but, you know, to me, it's just, I think it's not an in-your-face film either. It's a very eloquent film showing the history, but then showing the relationship of history with the two men being in the Garden of Humanity.
And just like film, the bust will live forever.
Yeah, there's a funny line in the movie. You know, Yaacov was talking to Ben. He goes, you know, do I get one? And Yaacov says, of course. And he goes, you know, Yaacov says so many times, the man is so witty, and they both are. They're both so sharp, and they come from a very similar place, but they're very different personalities. But this bust brings them together, you know, in the mix of life and art, and it's really profound.
I did a painting of him, and with a tear coming out of his eye, and I've seen him speak so many times, and he always, tears come out of his eyes when he starts talking about what he saw, not only at Nuremberg, but at the camps, when he liberated the camps in 5 campaigns with General Patton as a U.S. soldier. And he actually went into the camps, and he saw this with his own eyes, and it changed his whole life, because he knew these people needed somebody to fight for them afterwards. And he gave up his career as a law professor, as a lawyer, every year lecturing the graduating class of Harvard, where he graduated law. He gave all that law career up just to continue on to develop an international criminal court to try murderers, to try evil people who were doing this, who were creating genocide. I think the word genocide, he was the first one to use it. But he was sent back. He wasn't 27 when this happened. He was like 24, 25. He had graduated Harvard Law School already. And he's 5 foot. They didn't. He was 4F. They wouldn't even accept him in the Army. He had to fight for them and show them that, you know, his law degree and that he was a genius. And they took him in artillery, and they sent him with Patton in 5 campaigns in Europe. When he liberated the camps, I have a painting of him looking through the barbed wire, and what he saw in his eyes is a reflection of the International Criminal Court, which he developed. And there's actually a bench and a street named after him in The Hague, where the criminal court is. But all that, and seeing him speak at Holocaust dinners and luncheons for years, and every time I've heard him speak and seen the tears come out of his eye, that's what I wanted to capture in that bust of him. I wanted to capture that look, and I think I did it.
What are we missing? Like, what else do you need to tell us about Ben, about the film, that we don't know from just watching it?
I'll let you start.
The music score, for one thing, has been done. It's an original music score by some people who have put their hearts into it. Bob Fields, who is the composer, and his wife, she's playing also the viola in it, and they have an orchestra. But he was a lawyer. He was a defense attorney, a criminal defense attorney in New York. That was his career. Lorraine Marks started an orchestra called the Intergenerational Orchestra, and just fortunately, COVID, they've been home and they haven't been busy like they are with their orchestra, doing rehearsals and all that every Thursday night and giving concerts. We had the good fortune of having my friend Bob and Lorraine working on the musical score. And Lorraine's parents are Holocaust survivors. Yeah. I went to their house one time and they played us Schindler's List with such feeling. I said, these are the people that have to write the music for this film. And they put their heart into the music. And you're asking what's missing. Just talking about this part of it, I think it's wonderful.
We got together, and I was sitting with them, and we would create. You know, Bob and Lorraine are, you know, musical geniuses as far as I'm concerned. So I'd sit there with, you know, part of the documentary, let them watch it, and they would just knock it out. It's all original, and so when you look at the segments of the film, you know, every single note and segment of the music represents, in my opinion, you know, the impetus of what we're trying to communicate. So it's completely done. There's none of it was pre-recorded. So it's a very special element. I'm glad he brought that up as well. So as far as my answer, I don't think there's anything missing. It just sort of happened organically. We weren't trying to do this. The fact that we got Ben here was one thing. The fact that Yaacov, after being with him for 2-3 hours and then asking him to do the bus with another, seeing Yaacov create this from nothing, you know, I mean, one picture, 2 pictures, and then just, you know, it's just a completely organic thing. The story is very unique, and I think the artist of Yaacov Heller, the artistry of Yaacov Heller is, you know, you can see the entire process, which, being in the music business and doing documentaries and commercials my whole life, you know, artists don't necessarily like to be documented while they're working. And I think this is the first time, you know, Yaacov has been very generous with me in 2 years to get not only this, but, you know, as he's doing paintings of Connie Francis or, you know, the like, it's been just an amazing process for me, because we talk about how he's making it. In some cases, you know, he smiles at me, and I don't think he really can figure it. It's innate with him. So it's just been an amazing experience. There's nothing else I could say other than that. Ben would joke with Yaacov and I, where he goes, yeah, you know, he goes, how's my head? Like, you know, Ben and I would be on the phone. How's my head? When do I get my head? And he goes, you know, 2 heads are better than 1. I'm laughing. I go, all right, we'll figure it out, Ben. Don't worry, you know. So when I went to see him, it's almost a year ago now, to get the end of it, and he's reminiscing about the making of the film and Yaacov and how, you know, the best is sitting right next to him, okay, as he's saying this. And he goes, as I like to say, two heads are better than one. And to me, it became an acronym of what this entire, or symbolism of what this entire project was. Yes, there's two heads, Ben Ferencz and the Ben's bust, but the two heads of Yaacov Heller and Ben Ferencz, to me, where the double entendre occurs. So we all, you know, sat down and, you know, here's the title, what do you think? And very quickly we all agreed. And we wanted to honor the fact that, you know, Yaacov was making Ben's bust, but the story and the subtext to it is much larger than that.
And he was a genius. And the fact that Patton took him into his armed forces into Europe on 5 campaigns, and Ben was the one that went to get all the evidence in the files after the war. He was the one that went to Berlin and found all the evidence to convict this Einsatzgruppen group. There was 300 of them actually that murdered over 1 million people. And I said to Ben, I said, there were more than 22 generals involved, 22 people, murders. He says, well, I picked the highest educated ones, the doctors, the lawyers, the ones with the most education that should have known better, that should have had some moral ground to stand on. I picked those that I got evidence on them, and there were only 22 seats in the dock. That number 22 keeps coming up everywhere.
Gallery 22. Yeah.
But there were only 22 seats in the dock, and he convicted 22 of Nazi generals, and he questioned every one of them, and he said none of them had any remorse whatsoever.
Yeah.
My name is Avi Hoffman. I am the founder and CEO of the Yiddishkeit Initiative, which is dedicated to preserving Jewish culture and creating a Jewish cultural revolution for the world. For over 5,000 years, the Jews have been known as the people of the book. And what has kept our culture alive all these millennia has been our faith, our support of the concept of next year in Jerusalem. But the third component of Judaism has always been our cultural contributions to the world. My mother, Professor Miriam Hoffman, and I decided that the time had come to create an organization that was dedicated to the Jewish cultural revolution, rediscovering and supporting the creativity of 1,000 years of Yiddishkeit. We create, we produce shows all over the world, we create festivals, we have productions of theater, some Yiddish theater, some English theater based on Yiddish culture. We have lectures. The reason that we've created this organization is because we realize that there is an alarming need right now in the Jewish community to bring people together in a non-threatening way. Only 15% of the Jewish population affiliate with any kind of religious identity, which means that 85% of the Jewish people in the world today, certainly in America, do not necessarily feel affiliated with any organizational expression of Judaism. And yet they all love the culture.
I'm Professor Miriam Hoffman, one of the founders of the Yiddishkeit Initiative. I was born in a slave labor camp in Siberia, where my father was imprisoned. We knew nothing. My parents did, but I knew nothing growing up about Judaism, Jewish culture, Yiddishkeit, language, nothing, absolutely nothing, until we escaped the Soviet Union right after the Second World War. Suddenly, a whole new world opened up for me. Being in education most of my life, I transmit culture, language, traditions, customs to my students in Columbia University or Oxford University or Vilna University in Lithuania. It was important for me to share what I know and what I learned. I became a member of a people, and I feel at home.